we would normally use npx create React app, and we give it a name, new app. We'll run that. We'll let it go. We're not going to let it finish because, as we know, this takes a while. I'm just going to stop that and assume that we did that. Okay, there. So instead, I made a directory called Lighthouse-React. There we go. So the Create React app creates my React app for me with all of my node modules that I need. And I have it open here in VS Code as well. And as you know, it creates a bunch of files, public directory or source directory with some stuff we may not use. We usually clean this up. And we went over that on Monday, how we would normally clean up a React app once we're done, because you almost always do that. And to start the app, npm start, as we all know, we've done that many times already. npm start starts our app, which this is no news to anybody. We've run this lots of times. And there we go. We get the spinning atom for a Create React app. I know this is slow. We've done this many times this week, so I'll just be going through all this one more time, but I'll do it, So let's go and start cleaning up our app. So if you're coding along, by the way, I will have done that for you in branch number 2. I will have literally cleaned up this app with a clean React app, but I'm going to go ahead and do that myself. All I did was I simply removed all the stuff in my app.js in my div, and it's all cleaned. There we go. And I deleted a few files. I don't need to have some of these files, don't need the logo, so I can get rid of that. I can clean these files up as well. It's not a big deal, but that's normally something we do all the time when we create a new React app. We create the React app from the npx script, and then we delete some stuff. We don't need logo.js, so we delete these, there, and a bunch of other stuff. Remember earlier in the week, we talked about JSX, the language of React, and it's that combination of markup, this is markup, and JavaScript. So it's not quite HTML and it's not quite JavaScript. It's kind of something in between. And as we know, the return statement of our component, in this case, our component is app.js. Just so we know, we have a one component application right now. There are no other components. It simply has a component called app.js. And anything we type here, we type something there, that's what gets rendered on our web page, just like that. Okay, so let me just clean this up. I'm going to actually add some CSS. I'm going to delete that and add my really amazing CSS. All right, so anything I type here is going to end up on your page, just like that. So if I type hello, hello. I type hello here, hello shows up. If I give some markup, if I put a button with the word hello inside it, to no surprise, I get hello. I know this is a review, so this is nothing exciting yet. So one thing of course we can do with JSX is we can embed actual JavaScript in our JSX. So if I put a button like that, and instead I made that a variable, const, let's call a button, equals that. That's not quite JavaScript, is it? Because that is not a string. So if this was a JavaScript running a node or a browser, that'd be an error. But this is JSX. This is not actual JavaScript. That's perfectly fine. And I can then put my button right there, just like that. Okay, once again, this is no surprise to anybody. We've done this all week. So let's go ahead and build ourselves a little search app. I'll show what it's going to look like. Let's take a look at what it's going to look like at the end. So just so we know what we're going to work towards. Let me just go in here and I'll just kill my changes. Discard all changes. Yes. Back to my app. I'm going to just go to the master branch, and this is what it's going to look like at the end. Just like that. It's going to have a search page. Okay. And it'll be a search page. We can type stuff in like Stephen and it's going to give us some articles on, or how about Hawking? There, Stephen Hawking. There. Okay, so this is a really cool site that I'm using. I'm using a web service called Algolia, and it's actually pretty cool because when you type something in, if I type in cat, I'm not going to get like, here's my cat video. You get like articles, like actual full-on articles about stuff like Caterpillar, Catalina. So, so click on that link. You get an actual article, not just some little blurb. So this is more of an article web search. Anything you type in, you get. Type in Mercury. I'm going to get Mercury, right? Oh, Freddie Mercury as well. So you're going to get some real stuff about the thing you typed in. So I can click on that, and I'm going to get, wow, a Mercury colony? Seriously? Seriously? Sign me up. Yeah, bring my sunscreen. Okay. Anyway, so this is where we're going to end up. So let's start at the beginning here. So let's start with our clean app again. So start with a clean project. Okay. So what we're going to do is, let's make ourselves some data, okay? Because we want to read this particular website. What I would normally do is I'd go to the site and I'd see, well, what kind of data is it giving me? But we'll do that later. I'm going to assume it's going to give me just an array of data like that. And let's take a look to see that's correct. Let's go to the algolia.com thing. I believe I have it here. There. Algolia.com. This is the web service I'm using, and a web service is just some endpoint that will send me some JSON. There happens to be one that I didn't write. This is online, and I'll type in Mercury again, Mercury here, and look at that. I get back some JSON, which contains a whole bunch of stuff. Wow. Okay, let's take a look at this. So I get back a bunch of objects. It looks like. Let's look at the raw data. That's hard to read. Here's my JSON. I get a whole bunch of stuff. I get back a title. I get back a URL, and I get back an object ID. So these are the kind of three things I'm interested in. I want that, I want the title, and I want some kind of ID that I can use in my key, because as we all know, React tends to bark at us if we don't give it a key in a list. So I've gone to this web service. I think I'm going to use this thing. Okay, so I'm going to make myself some dummy data first, because I always start with that. I don't try to read the service to begin with, because that's way too much. I'm going to build myself some data that kind of looks like the data that I know I want to grab later on. So, okay. So let's do something. Let's build ourselves a list inside here. So let's make a little title. There we go. Let's call this my search app. Okay, I got a search app, and we're going to probably render a list. So let's just do that. Put a UL in here. This is exactly what we did in the scheduler app. We had a appointments list, we had a day list, we had an interviewers list. We just have a list, and inside our list we're going to put a bunch of LIs. So what's the easiest way to do that? Well, I could just put them in. LI. I could say, Mercury, just like that. And there's an LI. I'll just grab my CSS again. I must have lost that. So here we go. When I reset our changes. There we go. Oops. There we go. Grab my CSS. Okay. All right. So obviously I could do this. Type it in, but of course that's not very useful to us. What we can do is, what I want to have is a little list. There we go. Equals, I want to have an array of LIs. And essentially, this is exactly what I want. I want to have li with some stuff inside it. So let's have, well, let's say list item 1, 2, 3, and 4, just like that. There, all right. Okay. So all I would do, I'd simply add my li list directly into my managed list. Oops, come on. List there. Okay. And to no one's surprise, it shows up as my li. That's the really cool thing about React, and we've dealt with this all week, is that unlike jQuery, we don't have to go, get next item, jQuery build this tweet and then render tweet, insert tweet. We simply say, there's my list, and React goes, great, and it expands that list automatically for us. All we have to do is make sure we give it an array that it expects. It will automatically expand that. Now we have some data here. We have this. We'd like to have something like that. Now, in actual fact, what I really want to have is I want to have an li with probably a key equals 1, because as we all know, React really, really gets angry if you don't give it a key, doesn't it? So I want to have this, and then I want to have, let's take a look. I also want to have a URL inside here, don't I? So what I probably want to do is build, use my data there. Let's see what I can do. Yeah, I'll do it this way. I'll say, I'll put an A link in here. I'll make an A, and close off an A. Whoops, there we go. Just like that. And then list item 1, put it inside here. There, I'm just building a little li here. Something I think that I might use. There we go, I've got an A. Okay, and we'll go, href equals, let's do google.com. https, google.com or do google.ca. Okay, there we go. So this is pretty much, let's just make that smaller, kind of the format we want to have our list items look like in our search app. I've got an li, and each li contains an A link, just like that, there. Okay, so this is what I'm looking for. I want to build stuff that looks just like this in my search app. So in React, usually we end up with some data that we fetched from someplace. In the scheduler app, we fetched it from our endpoints, the appointments, the days, the interviewers. And here I'm fetching it from someplace else. And I know it's going to give me an object that looks kind of like this in an array. So this is what I have for an array, and this is what I need for an array. So fortunately, as we know, one of the patterns that we see an awful lot in React is we change one array into another array using the map function. So we use this all the time. I have this data, but I want it to look like this. So I want to map from one format to the other. So this is my, call it my new list. So my new list is going to be my data, the data that I have, data dot map. There is a data dot map function, which of course, as we know, takes missing argument. It takes an argument which is a function that executes every time we iterate over each one of these. So let's try that. Data.map, you get an item. That's how the data.map works. There we go. All right. And for each item, I'm going to just return, oops, return something. I'm going to return my JSX. So, which is going to contain my, just like this, an LI with my stuff in it. Just like that. Okay. Now this isn't going to quite work because I haven't done that quite yet. So there we go. And it's probably going to like me to, there we go. Actually, I don't need, let's do this instead. Let's do it without our, we'll do an arrow function with no curly braces there, because simply doing one thing. There we go. Okay. And unexpected token, I got the comma there. There we go. Okay. So now, okay, and it's going to work on me. Let's take a look. Right. So now I'm mapping my data object, and it's turning it into a new list. Now it's not rendering because I haven't told it to use it yet. So if I change my list to new list, I should get 2 of those. Great. Of course, I've hard-coded all of this, so nothing's going to change yet. So now let's just change some of this. I'm going to change this to, key is going to be, I'll use the object ID. So let's just use that. Item dot object ID. And for the href, why don't we use item dot URL? Great. Okay. Cool. And for the actual text that I want to see, why don't I use item dot title? Title. There. Okay. Great. And sure enough, it shows up in my list. I've got my 2 items right there. Okay. Any questions so far? I know this is pretty much a repeat from the week, but we're going through managed lists. This is called a managed list, and it's something we did at the very beginning in our day list. So, okay. Okay. So, next thing to do, why don't we keep track of something? Because right now, this is great, but we know for a fact that we cannot use this data directly because it's just a hard-coded set of data. We do need some state because we want this data to be able to change on us. So we're going to save this data or use state in this data. That'll be inside our component. Oh, hold on. There. There, that was bad. There, that belongs here. That's why I was getting warnings in React. Okay, so let's use some state. So let's just save our data as state, const data and set data equals use state. And let's rename this to test data for now. Like that. Now it's probably going to die on us because, let's take a look. Oops, semicolon. And okay, let's watch what happens. Oops, and oh, let's include use state. Okay, so what's happening is I'm getting data is undefined in my map statement, which means I'm trying to do a map the very first time I render this component. And oops, there. And of course, data is undefined, which means I'm going to get an error. Data is in fact undefined. Now I can start with an empty array, and that'll work. But in this case, I'm going to start with my test data, just like that. It says start with our test data. There. And now it's working again. So now we have the same application, but now this data is now being managed by React. So it now enables me to change data and it will survive a re-render. Remember we talked about on Monday that the whole purpose of having useState is so that your variable data or any other state variable will survive a re-render because nothing else survives. List, that does not survive a render. No other variable in here will survive a re-render, but data will. So the next time I enter this function, data will be whatever it was set to the last time. So that's the whole purpose of useState. So we have our useState. And once again, one of the big takeaways from today, what is useState for? It allows our variable, in this case data, to survive a re-render. What's a re-render, by the way? What is a render? Let's just type in log. I'm going to log re-renders of this. There, console log. A re-render in React terms means running this function again. That's a re-render. So when my component re-renders, it runs my component function again. So let's just put a little rendering, come on, app component. I put these in sometimes so I can see when my component actually renders. Let's look at our dev tools. There we go. And I got some errors, but rendering app component. Look at that. So our app component did render. So every time a render is called, I'll see that the console log. Okay, now nothing's going to happen because there's nothing to cause a re-render in this case. Here's a quick quiz. What will cause a re-render in React? Anybody? Want to hazard a guess? Okay. Set state. Okay. So yes, a change of state for a component will cause that component to re-render. And only that component. So if I change a component in my app, if I change its state, that component will re-render, but my app won't because it didn't have any app changing. So only the components whose state changes are the ones that actually get re-rendered. That's one of the things that makes React so efficient. And it checks only things that have changed. And even then it checks to see, okay, well, this is the only component that's changed. Let's go look at the DOM and see what DOM affected by the component or what parts of the document model has actually changed. And maybe it's only one attribute or one letter, an A. So it'll detect that and only change that A on the screen. So it's very efficient. All right. So as a change in state triggers a render. All right. Let's make ourselves a little component. We'll start off by doing it the easy way. We'll just embed it. So let's make ourselves a little an input. Okay. Let's make ourselves an input on the left here. Oh, look at that, re-rendered on me. I added a couple lines. So set data assigned. Oh, and list. We don't need our old list, do we? Let's just get rid of our old list. There we go. There. Okay. One warning. I'm not using set data yet. So, okay. Let's make ourselves an input component, or in this case, an input field. Now, this is just HTML. So input. There. Okay. There. I've made an HTML input as part of my page. Doesn't do much. Just doesn't force a re-render. So not much is happening here. Okay. Out the way here. So let's just do something with my input. I'm going to make it type equals text. This is not always necessary, but I like to put it in because it's good to have that there. Let's give it a value, and the value equals something. I'll make it blank for now. And now, if I type in my input, look at that. Nothing gets changed at all because I'm saying value is always equal to blank. So no matter what I type in here, the value of this input will always be blank. Okay. Yeah, I'm getting a warning saying, look, you made a value prop, but you didn't give it an on change. Ah, look at that. It's giving me some information here. React is saying, oh, wait a second, you've got this value. It's a fixed value, so nothing can happen. So maybe you want to have an on change or make it read only. So that's, thank you, React. Maybe I'll do that. So I'll need to have an on change. And this is another pattern. We talked about the pattern of managed lists. Now we'll talk about the pattern of a managed input field. And as people know, I use the word pattern a lot because it's something we do a lot in software development. We follow patterns. We don't reinvent the wheel every time. We try to follow established patterns. We're going to make a managed input field using that pattern. So the pattern is I need some state to actually store the input. So let's just put the input. Set input, and we'll save this as state equals use state like that. And we'll just give it an empty string. We don't need anything, anything fancy for this one. There, okay. If I say useState equals hello, and I say my value equals to my input. So now this is the pattern we use to create an input field where its data is managed. So there we go. I have value equals input. Input is now my variable holding my state. So of course, when I type again, once again, nothing happens because input is always equal to hello. So no matter what I do, it's always going to do that. And notice no state's changing. I didn't render my state at all because even though I'm typing stuff in, nothing changed. No state got changed at all. All right. By the way, anybody have a question on why we use this pattern here, the use state pattern? I know we covered it on Monday, and I know Andy talked about it again on Tuesday. So anybody have any questions about this particular pattern of use state and why we do this funny looking thing here? It's the array destructuring. We could have simply said, array equals use state, and then input equals array 1, set input equals input equals array 0, set input equals array 1. But this is just a shorthand way of grabbing the items out of an array. Okay. So as we're being told here by this angry message, we probably should have an on change handler in our input. On change. Let's try that. On change equals something. Something. I should probably make a function called on change, shouldn't I? So I'll make a function called on change. There we go. On change is not defined. No, it's not. Let's make one. So I'll make a function called on change. Equals function. Now, the onChange attribute of an HTML input tag expects a callback function, and that function will receive a single variable. We oftentimes call it event. When you click on your button, or rather you enter something in your input, it's going to fire your onChange function and give you an event. And the thing that's most useful to you in that event is event dot target dot value. Now, how did I know that? I just remembered. Now we look it up, but that's a pattern you're going to see over and over again. If you use a onChange handler in an input, you're going to get event, and you're going to probably use event.target.value. And I want to save that. And let's take a look. If only I had a place I could save my input from my form. And I do. I have a function that lets me save it. I'll go set input. There. Okay. So now I have saved the input in state. So this essentially completes the circle of a managed input field in React. Once again, one of those patterns we use over and over again. I have an input. I'm saying value equals some state variable, and onChange equals most likely a function that will set that state variable equal to the content of the field. So now when I type, there we go. It changes, and if you notice, I'm getting all these rendering app components. Let's clear our log and watch that again. So if I enter something, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3 times, it rendered my component 3 times. And why did that happen? Of course, it rendered because now I've changed some state, and it re-renders, which means it runs my function all over again. And it runs this all over again. It makes a new input with the value equal to the new value of input. So what's happening is essentially my shadow DOM is recreating this every single time I type a key. So when I hit that H a couple of times, I've just rebuilt this div 3 times in memory, which is kind of cool. It's rebuilding the whole thing every time. Oops, there. So every time you type something, it's rebuilding my entire component from scratch. It's like, wow, that's kind of cool. But of course, React has the shadow DOM and the real DOM. It builds this one in shadow DOM, then it checks the real DOM in the browser and say, well, how does this one with my extra H compare to the one I just had before with no extra H? Oh, well, the difference is it has an H. So that's all that changes in my browser is that one H. So here's one with no H, and it runs. I give one H, it's going to rebuild my whole div. Now my value is a new thing. It's a single H, and forces a re-render with an H in the console. It seems kind of weird, but that's literally how it works. It rebuilds the entire component from scratch. Essentially, it returns all of this, but it happens really fast. So, all right, now we have a managed component. Do we hello in there? All right. So, sorry, a managed input field. Any questions on the managed input field? You're going to see this pattern over and over again. You'll use it yourself a lot of times. Input, type equals text, value equals something, onChange equals a function. Over and over again. All right. Let's do something else. Let's make a button that goes with it. Okay. Let's make our button. There's a button. And we'll say, well, we'll just say search. There. Search button. Okay. This will be a managed button. So not a lot we need to do with buttons. Buttons only do a couple different things. Just click on them. That's kind of it. So we need an on click. Before I do that, I'm going to say type equals button. Now, why would I do this? Like, what's a button? Why would you say type equals button? It is a button. Well, in HTML, as it turns out, the default type of button is what? Anybody want to hazard a guess as to what you get if you just say button? What type do you get?
Submit.
Yes, we get a submit. I don't know whose idea that was, but you get a submit button. And if you're in a form and you say button, it's going to be by default a submit button. It's crazy, but of course, back in the day, that's the only way we had of submitting forms. So the powers that be said, well, forms we got, we'll make it easy for everyone. Since of course they're going to want to have a submit button all the time, we'll make it default to type submit. They want button doesn't do anything, but submit, that does something. 25 years ago. Well, now it is much more common that we don't use submit buttons. We just use normal buttons that don't have a submit function. So this will not cause my form to actually submit right there. Now, fortunately, I am not inside a form, so nothing would happen anyways, but I just tend to do it as a matter of good practice. Okay, so this is a manage button. I want an on click equals and some function. Okay, and I'm going to make a button. It's going to call search or on click. Sure, let's call our on click function on click just to be confusing. Okay, this name could be anything, but I'm going to call it on click. Let's make a function. Const on click equals. Now the on click, it doesn't need any parameters. It does get an event, but we seldom use it. So in this case, I'm not going to bother with the event parameter in my on click. Okay. So what I want to do with this, I probably want to save what I typed. So I'm going to type stuff in, Mercury, and I want to have my button probably save what I typed. Okay. In fact, why don't I, just for fun, why don't I just right there, let's show what I typed. There. Let's go H4 there. And we're going to show our input right there. Input there. That's kind of fun. Right, let's look at our page now. So when I type now, see my input ends up right there. There we go. Okay. Very fun. So I want to take this and I want to build a URL probably. So let's try that. I want to actually build a URL because that's ultimately what I want to search with. I want to build a URL. So I'm probably going to need another state to handle that one. So let's do that. Let's make a little piece of state called URL. Const. And we'll make a URL. Set URL. Oops. Equals use state. And once again, it's probably just going to be empty for now. There. Okay. Right. And maybe let's show our URL at the bottom here. Why not? We'll just show our URL right after our search button here. There. Let's do, what should we do it here? Same thing, H4. Sure. H4. And we'll show our URL. Okay. Okay, so I type, I get my input. So let's have, when I click the button, I'm going to build my URL, shall I? And what I'm going to do, I'm going to save. There we go. Here's my link to my, there. That's my search site that I'm going to use. We did this before. I'm going to call it base URL. Equals that right there. And all I need to do is put something there, and that'll do my search. So what I want to do is, when I hit my search button, I want it to put in my, in this case, Mercury, or whatever is in my input field, right there at the end of that. There we go. Okay, let's do that. So when we click on the button, set URL to, oh wow, base URL plus input, because input I know is going to be set for me because that's changing every time I type. Input. output. There. Cool. Okay, let's try that. Let's try and type stuff in. Okay. Oops, not yet. Why not? Let's take a look. Okay, on click. Because I haven't clicked yet. Okay, let's try and click. Oh, look at that. Great. That's my URL. Let's clear that. Click again. Ah, of course. Now it does this every time, of course. So it sets to base URL plus blank. So that's cool. Let's refresh again. I start with a blank one because I started off with a blank state of my URL, just like that. If I click search with nothing, it's still going to add that with nothing at the end. So this is cool. I've now got a URL. I can work with this. Okay. So this is a managed button. We talked about managed lists. That's great. We talked about a managed input. And now we have a managed button. These are the three things you're going to see an awful lot of. And in React, these are probably one of the more common things you're going to see. Lists, inputs, and buttons. We do all the time. Quite often your button might be a div, because you can easily just do the same thing. Have a div with an input. It's not going to like type equals button, but it still works. Look at that. I click on it and it still does stuff. So you might want to have a fancy button you build yourself. A div can have an on click just as much as a button. I just did a button because it was a little easier to see it was actually a button. So when I say manage button, I kind of manage button in the small b sense. It doesn't have to be an actual HTML button. It can be anything that will handle an on click, which honestly in HTML is pretty much anything. You can put an on click on an input field. You can put an on click on a button, on click on some text, really on a div, anything you want. So that's a managed button. Okay, we're almost ready here. So let's get the fun stuff, which is our actual fetching data. Okay, so anybody remember what module we use to fetch data? I know we've done this the last couple of days, so what module we're going to use? Everyone. It's called, come on. Yeah, there's one. Anybody else? Axios? Who votes Axios? Don't have to, we can use fetch. But yeah, we're going to use Axios. Yeah, what he said. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll use Axios. Axios is like by far the most common and popular library for fetching. There is the new one that's built in called Fetch. It's still not gaining traction because you have to do a couple more things. You got to kind of convert to JSON, back from JSON. Yeah, so it hasn't quite caught on yet, but it does work. But we're going to use Axios. So let's get Axios, import Axios from Axios. And I think I may have, take a look. Oh, I may have done that. I think I've already installed that in this project. So otherwise I'd get an error and I'd have to do npm install Axios, but I think I did. All right. So what I want to happen here, let's see. What I want to happen is I want to fetch data from this URL. So, and I want it to happen, I could make it happen when the page starts. That's great. So I could say in my on click, but I'm going to probably need something else. I'm going to use effect because what I want to have happen, I want to have happen either at the beginning when page loads or when something changes. In this case, when the URL changes. And that's called creating a side effect. Now, I have noticed that a lot of times when a lot of online courses and stuff teach what useEffect does, they kind of teach it starting with side effects first. And people start to think, oh, side effects are bad. You have to handle side effects. No, that's not what we do. In fact, we want to create a side effect. We don't want to manage a side effect. We don't want to wait for a side effect. We want to create a side effect. And the side effect is going to be fetching my stuff from Axios. So for instance, a side effect of my page loading, for instance, could be loading your appointments in your scheduler app. So it's not the page render that is a side effect. That's the effect. What's happening is the effect is page load. The side effect is loading from Axios. So we use useEffect, which is the hook, useEffect. And we've done this before. We're going to go useEffect. useEffect, just like that. And useEffect takes two parameters. The first parameter is what you want to do. It's a function. There's a function. Doesn't do much, but it's a function. Okay, if I just did this, what would happen? So if I just did useEffect with nothing but this, what's going to happen with this function? Has everyone run their Beyonce app in Compass? I call it the Beyonce app. As we know, if you don't give it a second parameter, this effect function is going to run every single time the component renders, every single time. So sometimes that might be useful. In this time, no, this is not one of those times. So we don't want to run every time. What we're going to give it is a list of when you want it to happen. So useEffect, two things: what you want to do and when you want it to happen. So in this case, I want my function to run when something. Think of it as a listener. useEffect is a listener. It listens to things happening and then creates a side effect based on that. So if I just did this with an empty array, what does that mean? If I just give an empty array, what happens? Runs once, runs the first time. Both are correct. Yes, it runs on, really, this is like your document ready. Remember jQuery with document ready? That's what this is. This is the React version of document ready. It'll run when the page is mounted and loaded and first rendered. Runs once. Okay, let's give it a function, by the way. Since we're here, there. Let's do our Axios. Axios.get. There. And I'm going to Axios.get from URL because I know that I have my URL there. Okay. Axios.get returns what? Anyone? This is important for tomorrow. Actually, by the way, very important for tomorrow. Returns a promise. Yes, returns a promise. That's important tomorrow. Tomorrow's instructions in Compass are challenging, to put it one way. Just remember, you Axios.get returns a promise, which you can then do stuff with in the then, but you can also pass that then back to somebody else, and they can do a then on it. Very important, or a catch. So we'll do a dot then here. There's my dot then. And as the usual then pattern, I love that word pattern. Okay. And I'm going to do a really bad job. I'm not going to have a catch yet. So there we go. All right. Let's look at our console and let's take a look. Here we go. So no errors yet. Great. Okay. But look, it's saying unused vars. What is this? Oh, React hook useEffect has a missing dependency URL. Either include it or remove it from the array. Interesting. All right. What this means is it says, wait a second, it looks like you're using this thing. You should do something with it. It's kind of smart. What I want to have happen is when URL changes, that's when I want to run this effect. Not when I load my page the first time. It's kind of fun, but that's not important. What I want to have happen is I want this useEffect to run when URL changes, because that's exactly what I want. I click the search button and URL is going to change. All right. So now this is great. I have pretty much all of my data. I'm going to simply say, well, set data, because that's all I need, right? I have set data. But I know that this particular, there we go, set data with my res.data, I could do this, and that would probably work. Ah, look at that. It looks like my res.data is not an array. Let's go back to our site and take a look. Let's take a look. What is it? I'm getting this error. We've all seen the map is not a function. Anybody not seen this in their code yet? If you haven't, you're better than me. So yeah, we see this all the time. The data is not a map, like, or map is not a function. Like, what the heck? Yes, this happens to me all the time. This means I've forgotten something. Let's take a look. There's things as React programs we see all the time. That's one of them. This map is not a function. Like, oh, God, really? Oh, here we go. Well, it's right. Apparently, I get back a thing called hits. Let's take the raw data. Oh yeah, I get back, it sends me an object. And inside that object, it's got an array, and that array is called hits. Oh, okay. I can deal with that. Okay, array called hits. All right. So let's go data.hits instead. There. Okay. Okay. res.data.hits. And of course, it's not going to work yet because I've got blank in my data. So, because there's no hits here anymore, right? In my test data. So I probably shouldn't use my test data anymore, should I? So that's not going to work. Oh, it looks like it really, really wants now to have an object with a hits. So I probably should do it on my own. Let's make an object with a hits inside it. There. All right. Okay, and let's take a look. Hits is not an object. Come on. Oh no, look at that. There we go. Close that. There we go. There we go. Okay, now I got something. What's happening was my Axios ran right away, and I was getting, of course, Axios with an absolutely empty URL. I was getting nothing. So I certainly didn't have a hits content in my nothing. So here we go. All right. So now, interesting that even with a blank URL, we get Stephen Hawking's diet as our first response. That's kind of cool. Huh. And oh, look, another news flash. Steve Jobs has passed away. Wow. That must be like the default thing. Okay. So here we go. We pretty much have a working search page. If I enter something in here, like Mercury, there's my input, my state changing. By the way, has anybody used the DevTools component or DevTools plugin for Chrome? Let's take a look where they have components, and you can see your component. Right now I have an app component, and you can see your state. So as I type stuff, you can see, there's the one state right there, which is my input state. Let's just Mercury, as I type, that's changing. And look at my other URL state, that is not changing. So when I press search, let's think about what's going to happen here. I press search. Search is this button right here. It's going to call the onClick handler that I called onSearch, which is a function. So I click the button, it's going to call my onClick. Okay, what's onClick going to do? onClick, all it's going to do is set the URL state equal to that thing, base URL, plus whatever it found in my input. Oh, what was my input? Well, as I typed, what happened there? As I typed, My on change was changing the contents of my input. So when I click the button, my URL is now going to be set to that plus that. And I have a useEffect. I'm saying, oh, let's watch URL. When URL changes, let's generate a side effect and we'll run axios.get. So the side effect of URL being changed is axios.get. And it sets my data to res.data, which then, of course, once again, that's another re-render because I'm setting some state. So the whole thing runs again. And now I have new data in here. These aren't used. It builds a new list. It renders a whole new component and compares it to what's on the screen. And that's what I see. So let's try that. Click, and it worked. I click search. It took my input, put it on the end of my base URL, updated the URL. My useEffect noticed that URL is changed. Let's go fetch Axios. Axios gets my data, sets state the data, re-renders the whole thing again because data's changed, and I get a whole new list. So this is the concept of useEffect. I think in our scheduler app, we'd only have a useEffect that runs once on first load or document ready in jQuery terms. This is the more common use of useEffect, having it listen to some piece of state change, very likely a string. And like it really likely, it'll be the URL of something you want to update. So you want to update someone's data, you click on update, you change the URL. Instead of having the button click directly call Axios, which I could have done, but it was much easier just simply have it update the URL. It's much less work for me. So rather than having on click calling this, which by the way, I could have done, but that requires me to do a lot more stuff. Really, I just want to update the URL. So in this case, I had on click, just change the URL, and I let useEffect worry about the details. It noticed URL changed and called axios.get. Okay. Everyone doing okay? A little over time. I've got about 5 minutes more. Why don't we take this and put it into a component, all right? Because right now this is just one big component. So let's take this app and split out what we need. We're going to take this part right here, because that is a very common pattern that we'll use probably in our final projects as well. And so we're going to make ourselves an input component. We did this on Monday, remember? I think we put it up top, but we're going to make it a separate file this time. We're going to make a component called input. So who has not created a React component yet? I think that was all day Tuesday. We did nothing but creating React components. So make a quick one. Let's just go into here, make a new file, and we'll call it new file. We'll call it input.js. All right. And let's just pretty much copy the whole thing because I am really lazy and remove the stuff we don't need. We don't need a useEffect because this is there we go. We don't need Axios and we don't need any CSS. Not really, no. Okay, we don't need our test data. We need to call it input, and it probably gets props, which we will do in a minute. We don't need that. We don't need that. We probably just need to have its own state. So I'm going to have this little component do nothing but have its own state. There. Okay. All right. And I'll start out with an empty state. Okay. So that's all this thing does. And all I want to have, I'm going to give it just an empty fragment there and an empty fragment there and nothing else. Input and a button. So now I have a component that all it does is it shows a input field and a button. Really common thing that we do in application building. And I encourage you, you want to use this, go ahead and take it. It's up in GitHub. Now let's make it a little more useful because it doesn't do much yet. So we have a function called input. Anything else we don't need here? Oh, we don't need this list. Don't need that. There we go. Okay. And there we go. Okay. There is an input component. Now we have an on change. So it's going to do something when the on change is going to set input. So this is going to stay the same. We're going to keep our input. Whenever things change, we're going to keep our input there. Now let's go use our component. Import input from input. There we go. Now it's either going to crash or it's going to work. Oh, I got a token. Oh yeah, I got to empty. Hold on. Right there. Default. Come on. There. I copied too much. 1 second. Input. I copied the whole thing. There we go. Okay. All right. I don't need that. There we go. Okay. And set URL. Ah, yes. On click. Can't use yet. There we go. Okay. Let's use our input. What happened was I had this set URL function, but I'd removed that set URL from state. So of course I can't use that. I'm going to have an on click, more of a general purpose on click. Okay, let's use our input. Go back to our render here. Let's put it on top for now. There we go. Input. There we go. There's our input. In fact, we don't even need that. There we go. Let's take a look. Ha, we got one. Look at that. One word, we got an input. That does stuff. There we go. Let's look at our dev tools. Take a look at our component. There we go. Hold on. Here we go. Components. Ah, look at that. App. And we have input. And it has some state. Let's start typing into our state. Look at that. There's a state. Now notice that doesn't change because that's somebody else's state. Each component has its own state. So my input has its own state now. Great. Click the button and nothing happens. Of course, I didn't define an on click, so nothing's going to happen. But I've got a component. Awesome. Okay. All right. There's my input. Let's do something. Why don't we make it when somebody presses the button of our input, let's make it do something. But what you make it do, we can't do set URL. So really in this component, we don't know what we'd like it to do. So as those of you who've heard my lectures before, this is a problem. And when we come across a problem in React or in general in coding, what's the best thing we should do? What's the ideal solution to any problem that we come across in coding? This is an object-oriented function. Yeah, give it to somebody else. Yes, make it somebody else's problem. That's the #1 way to solve a problem, is not my problem. So right now, I'm the input.js designer. That's my job. I don't know who's going to be using my input. I could be anybody. So I don't want to have to worry about what happens when on click. I don't care. It's not my problem. It's their problem. So I'm going to make it their problem. I'm going to say, oh no, I'm just going to call props.onClick. There. That's it. I'll call their onClick, but I'll be nice. So I'll call props onClick, but maybe I'll send them my input. There we go. There we go. My problem is solved. Okay. I don't have to worry about what's going to happen when somebody calls my onClick or clicks my button. I'll just make it happen. So, oh, of course, not an onClick is not a function. It wasn't defined. So I'm going to say, well, look, guys, one of the rules that if you want to use my button is you have to give me an on-click. Or I could simply say, you know, if props.onClick. Maybe I should. I'll try to be a responsible component designer. And I'll say, if there is an on-click, then call it. If not, well, tough for you. You know, it's not my problem, it's your problem. So I click on that and on-click wasn't defined, but my component, because it's a robustly designed component, works great. Okay, let's do something else. Maybe I'm going to make this a little more flexible. See, I've got this button. It says the word search. You know, why don't I make that somebody else's problem again? I'm going to say, I'll make it props dot, you know, title text, button text. Button text. There we go. Button text. Now the button's empty. I wasn't given a button text. So now when you want to use my input, you're going to have to give me an on-click if you want something to happen. And you got to give me something like on-click or a button text. And I suppose I could give it like a little ternary saying, you know, button text question mark, or then say, if no button click, give them the default thing search. I can do that too. But I'm not so nice today, so I'm just going to say, you have to give that to me. Okay, there's our input. Let's go to our app. So now we want to use input. Well, we know we have to give it some button text because the guy that wrote that thing said, you got to give button text, or you're not going to get anything in a button. So I'll say search. Now, there. Okay, and there we go. My component now says search now. Now, I think hopefully by now we're all pretty clear on the relationship between attributes and props. When you pass an attribute to a component, it's going to show up as a prop in the component. So once again, when you give an attribute to a component, that shows up as a prop dot that same name in the component. If I call this, you know, cat equals, then this is going to be props.cat. So the names have to match. So button text there and button text there. Okay. So I have to give an on click because do something. On click equals. Well, I have a function called on click. It's right there, on click. So I'll use that one. Seems kind of useful. There, I'll call my on click. Cool. All right, let's try it. Search now. Oh, didn't get my results. Why? Well, let's take a look. Well, apparently, the guy who designed this input component a few minutes ago says, yes, when you give me your on click, I'm going to call your on click and I'm going to give you my input in the text field back as a parameter, which means when you want to use my on click, you had better have, or input, I suppose. Could be anything. I'll call it text for now, just to be confusing. There. You should have my parameter to use. So all I have to do now is simply change that. Okay. Let's see what happens here. Let's try our search now button. I'm going to type in something, Mercury. Search now. And it worked. Okay. That means our component works, which means we don't need this stuff here anymore. There. We can maybe delete these two. I think these two, that's the old input. There we go. Okay. Let's try it. Once again, we have our component. We've given it, say, search. We've given it text for the button and an on click. These names just happen to be called on click. I could have called this anything. That's my function name. And this attribute, once again, this could be dog equals on click. and props dot onClick. So props dot dog. Once again, attributes and props just need to match. The name could be anything. Same thing. So I just happen to call this onClick because it's, it's kind of a cool name, right? So onClick, there. Give it a try. Mercury and search, and there. So we've got a pretty decent working page here that kind of does everything we need. Don't need our test data there anymore. There we go. There. And we don't need input because that's being managed. This input state is now being managed for us by our input component. So that's not needed anymore. We need the data and on chain. We don't need an on change because we're not managing that anymore. So we don't need to manage the input. There we go. So all we need to do is supply an onClick function for our input component. That's going to give us our text and we can do stuff with it. Once again, I could have made this do an Axios call and set the data. I could simply take this and put that right in there. But I'd have to set my URL first, of course. But I could do this. That'll probably work. We do it twice. It's going to set my data. Or it'll crash. Let's try it. It worked. It did it twice. What happened was it set my URL. That forced a re-render because URL changed. Then it forced a side effect which called this, and then it did this, so it called it twice. So in this case, I like that look better. Just set the URL and let the useEffect take care of that. Okay. Well, that's kind of our discussion for today on React.